for you watching this on TV, folksies, it's our information that in some cities, a few cities, we're taping an hour at a time, and that some cities are only getting 30 minutes. And so what's going on the first 30 minutes that we tape here, normally taken up by reading what's known as Kyroots said, one-liners, proverbs, fairy tales, strange weirdness in print. And then we have a clock here that shows which page is being read, and then people turn in the number of the page when they'd like to hear an additional comment on. And then I take the second part of the show to look at the list and go back and see if there's some additional comment that might prove entertaining. So that's where we are for those of you who do not get the first part of the show. So here we go. Are you ready? And Kyroots said, although not commonly available or much sought out, there is a kind of simplistic intellectual food that is actually enriched. Should I borrow a pen? There is a kind of plain thought. We keep using a term for the time being around here about revolutionist thinking or fresh thinking, but there is a kind of plain thought of looking at things that almost bridges the gap between what would be the primary and the secondary, that gets close to being the primary being able to talk. It would be, I suggest to you, what has been a historical interest in believing that children might have something interesting to say, that out of the mouths of babes, or that somebody, the emperor's new clothes, that everybody's saying, oh, look at the emperor, how great he is, if you remember that story, and he's naked. And some little kid says, what clothes? The old fart is naked. And everybody goes, oh my. But of course the reason the story is remembered is not to make fun of the emperor. The gist of it being that there is a kind of attraction, and even in a more apparently complex way, if you can follow it, people continue to encourage one another that they should tell the truth. Nobody's quite sure what it means, but they say we'd be better off psychologically. Personal relationships might be better if you could tell the truth, if you could tell people how you feel. And almost everyone, even the very sophisticated, will say that's got to be true. And yet they usually fall back on saying, but for some reason I can't. Something holds me back, it's inhibitions, it's social pressure. I suggest to you that something else. It is a kind of simplistic intellectual food that is not natural. It's not supposed to be natural. And the Kyroots says it's a kind of simplistic intellectual food that is actually enriched. And we're back in the general ballgame, but where it sounds as though it's some sort of paradox. Because how can it be simplistic and enriched? Well, now, if it was just a child, if it's just a child saying, well, there's another one, if you're tired of the emperor's new clothes story. Supposedly, it was supposed to be about somebody, I forget, the Secretary of State during 1920. During Grover Cleveland's administration. I forget who, but somebody was supposed to have had a nose that makes some of us look like we're poster boys. And he was coming to have dinner with some socially climbing family, and the mother kept telling the kid, whatever you do, don't you mention that man's nose or we'll be social outcasts forever. And sure as hell, he came in with his great snize, and the young daughter, they introduced the family, she runs out and brings in the tea, and she pours him a cup and says, would you like lemon or cream with your nose? Back to the point. As intriguing as it may sound, and as many times as people wish, so they say after the fact, they say, I wish I had told the truth. My boss said, what do you think of this idea? And I wish I'd stood up and said, let me tell you what I think. Industrial strengths suck, is what I think your idea. But I couldn't. Back to what I wanted to point out, this was not just meant for the sake of paradox, there is something inherent that Kyroots was trying to convey of using enriched, of this kind of information if it was willful. If you could actually bring it up yourself, it would be enriched, even though it's simplistic in a sense. If it was just a child saying that, you've got nothing. Because no matter what you say, if you have any business following such as this, you do not really want to be a child again, not intellectually. Or you could say an idiot. Many Eastern stories and some of the Eastern philosophies there, and even in the West, but there has been a certain kind of aura at times given over to idiots, people who seem to have mental problems because there have been tales or ideas such as the gods have blessed these fools because they'll tell the truth. They don't care. But who wants to be that way? Don't raise your hand. At any rate, if you were if for some reason you were rendered a sharp blow in the head and it put you back to the mental capacities of yourself when you were 7 years old, or if you were now suddenly rendered to be a clinical imbecile, that's nothing. You'd be no better off. You notice I didn't say you're worse off, but you wouldn't be any better off. So this kind of simplicity, the suggestion is that it comes about not through retardation, not through regression. It would be like a new level of simplicity. Is why the sentence contains the idea, the juxtaposition of a simplistic intellectual food that is, in truth, enriched. And Kyroots said, all claims are local, all refutations universal, and none of the locals can hear the universal. This was actually tied to another one, if you recall. They were kind of staggered. First, page 16, Kyroots said there is no basis to any claim. And then it was page 19 that followed back up and says, oh, okay, all claims are local, all refutations universal, and none of the locals can hear the universal. So first consider that all claims are local. If you can fall into this in your own way, that is about as broad as you could take it anyway. But if I may speak for Kyroots, he didn't put any conditions as all claims. Anything that your mind claims. Of course, you can start the easy way and say anything that anybody claims has no basis. And from a more complex view, that is a fact, not because I said it or the Kyroots said it, and it doesn't matter where the claim came from, whether it came from an institution, a religious leader, a political leader, any claim. Now, we're talking about secondary because there are no such things as primary claims. If there are, they're insane, they're suicidal. It is an idiot again, truly. So the only claims are secondarily. And the most obvious ones always being somebody shouting out and waving around some source of authority or apparently calling upon it and saying, here is what the gods want. And all you've got to do is be ordinary. But do not make the useless mistake of laying it on culture. But if you're just ordinary and say you grew up in a particular religion, even if you're not a hot pursuer actively involved in that religion, there is a certain kind of message. There's a certain kind of energy that flows between you and the speaker that makes you respond if somebody hollers, let's say just something that's not all that limited to a particular religious cult, that God wants everyone to be honest. Now, no one resembling the sane would refute that. But there is no basis for that. And yet it seems to be. Who's going to say it? We should not be honest. We'd be better off. Certainly we wouldn't be better off. The secondary world could not even survive. But as far as there being a basis for it, there is none. Which is why I would further suggest to you the need for apparent external authority. Because if it started off, which it could not have done, but had it started off in just one guy somewhere, some caveman, fair-sized nose, decent haircut, one of the first ones who was literate, or at least verbal, he says, you know what, guys? And they go, He says, there's one thing for sure. We may get by with stealing each other's food and somebody staying in my cave when I'm gone. But I'm going to tell you what, if we're going to survive here together, we're going to have to be honest. And they all, I suggest you, first went, what the hell? There is no basis for it. Any claim that humans make, do you understand, is a secondary claim. If it's a primary claim, it's just silly. That would be like a claim, we've been through this before, it would be like the government, for instance, running public service announcements encouraging people to eat. I mean, it's just silly. You'll encourage people to eat the right foods. But you do not have to encourage people. You don't have to make claims for the primary world. You don't have to say, God wants you to eat. It's silly. Or you don't have to claim, even if it's non-religious, that eating is good for you. All claims are secondary. That is all the secondary world is, in a sense. And what, even if I had some ordinary minds would follow that, they would then begin to drag their feet if you said there is no basis for any claim. But it is a fact. There is no basis for it. There is as much basis for it, of course, as a rose has some basis in fertilizer that could have been delivered here 6 months ago from the other side of the world. There is always a connection. But to say that there is per se, to say that there is a prima facie isolated basis for any claim, such as God wants families to stay together, or nature, you know, don't be, nature wants families to stay together, or it's good to be good. Any claim that's made, there is simply no basis for it. Well, of course, other than the fact that if you understood it, you would not ever tell anybody that, because you want everyone to assume there is, because we're assuming that you don't want to see the secondary world blow up in your face. You'd take away a whole lot of the fun, the safety, and the security, and you'd have to be spending more time finding something to eat. But there is no basis for any claim. If you need any further way, try looking at what we mentioned about advertising. That, not to pick on advertising, but it is a secondary phenomenon. And the less something is absolutely necessary, in other words, the further something is removed from the necessary primary world, the more people must be told that it is so. In other words, it must be continually supported by what? The big C. Clusters. Claims. There must be continual claims made, all the way from God to honesty, to nationality, nationalism, brotherhood, decency, fidelity. Anything in the secondary world must be continually supported by claims, whereas the primary needs none whatsoever. So, on the basis, I assume you can see that you could, as we pointed out, you could in fact absolutely live just on the basis of the primary world. It wouldn't be much of a life today, but you could live. So on that basis, you could do without the secondary world, right? That it's disposable, expendable. So once you see that, then you see, well, why do people continue to put up with it? Because there's like a continual selling job. It's just not normally put in these kind of terms, but there must be continual claims made. Who's talked about more than anybody? More than cigarettes or beer, light beer, throughout the ages is God. Who gets a bigger selling job than the gods? Right after that is probably decency, but most people think they're handmaidens, in which the whole thing can be wrapped up in civilization, or the whole thing can be wrapped up in the secondary world. It has to be continually sold. Now back to this one. On the basis of that, the follow-up was all claims are local. All refutations universal, and none of the locals can hear the universal. So the point is, anything such as I've just done, because I just refuted all claims, did I not? Sounded that way to me. I just refuted it. But who could hear it? So you can understand what I'm saying anyway. But people could hear the words and they'd go, what the hell was that? And I don't mean just me, of course. All claims are local. That's what the secondary world is. And then anything, and I'm calling it refutations, that is anything that conflicts with it. Anything that would say, in other words, would tell the more complex truth. All claims are local. So there's some claim somewhere, like on this planet, that God wants us to be good people. God wants us to be civilized. That's the claim. Then the universal would refute that. Now, as always, the word sometimes Kyroots plays, not just refuting it, not just naysaying it, it would just be to show that that is a very childish, very limited, very parochial view. It's a claim with no basis. So it refutes the fact that God wants you to be good. All right. So anything that conflicts, anything that swallows, anything that would override the local is universal. And so you can go, okay. But then, trust me, it's semicolon. And then it points out, none of the locals can hear the universal. Is that not sweet? In other words, those making claims, the message pointing out the limited nature of claims, the message is everywhere. But it's of such a nature that those who make claims cannot hear. Of course, they're not supposed to, because then you could not have the kind of struggle that makes energy flow. Because somebody would stand up and make a claim such as, we should all be Catholic. And the guy over here would stand up and say, well, I was going to say we should all be Muslim. And they would suddenly hear some greater universal message like, are you guys kidding? And they would both go, my goodness. You know, let's become cab drivers and go get a beer. Come on. Or something silly. Things wouldn't work like they do now. Well, I'm just going to read this one. Obviously somebody liked it. It's a man writing to our show. I find it surprising how many things seem confusing until someone asks you about them. Then your reply quite often, in instant retrospect, adds, makes one long for the comfort and clarity of merely confusing. We got some comedian here who wanted to hear that again. Well, all right, this is very close to the same thing I was talking about, but I'll do it since someone requested it. One old man told his kid, there can be real personal profit in a knowledgeable, it's in quotation marks, knowledgeable disregard for the conventional, but it must be done in secret. That would be understanding. See, all conventional wisdom, no matter where you are, if we were doing this and we were standing in Saudi Arabia, and instead of me continue dragging out the Pope, I'd be talking about in Christianity and Judaism, I'd be pulling out Islam. And I'd be pulling out, of course, its connection to their everyday civic life. Whatever the conventional wisdom, that and social mores, their ideas of commerce, all of that is the conventional wisdom, the conventional way of doing things. And it's all based on claims. It's not based on the primary world, because the primary world, there would be no business. There would be no laws of contract and interstate commerce and et cetera. The law would be, let's see, I think I want what he has. Give me that. Of course, at the real good level, you wouldn't say, give me that, you'd take it. I mean, if I say, give me that, because the guy'd have a couple of seconds warning, he might try to grab it and run. That's the world of primary business. So the old man points out there can be real personal profit in a knowledgeable disregard of the conventional, but it must be in private. That is like, all right, make it crude. Doesn't cost any more. That's like a man saying, hey, I want everybody here to know, before you take offense, I want you to know that I'm a rebel. And people go, what? I'm a rebel. You know, by the time you do that, it's a bit late. Or again, it's like an artist who seeks the approval of the world is like a bullet that comes with an apology. Yes, I'm a rebel. Are you dangerous? I could be. Do you not believe in the kind of stuff we believe in? No, not me. Do you know what we believe in? No, it doesn't matter. I don't believe in it either. You look like you could be a real woolly sort. Yeah, don't push me. As long as the guy says he's a rebel, you're kind of giving the game away. No, and I'll just read it. I don't know what else anybody wants me to say. And Kyroots said, one day while he was off alone, one kid thought, why is it that life just seems to be begging for criticism? I said I wouldn't say anything, but it is a decent question, as much as Kyroots and I have tried to get you to see that all forms of criticism of the secondary world are just to be charitable to a revolutionist view is somewhere this side of a waste of time. Yet that be true. Let's assume that's true for the sake of an argument. I ain't got time to argue. Then why is it, this kid said, and he was expressing the truth, why is it that you look around, just mind your own business, let's say that you've tried to get yourself kind of in a neutral, objective mode, and you just look around, not looking for trouble, not even wanting trouble, and you look around, and even if you don't dive in, it's almost as though life is just out there like somebody, a bully or somebody just trying to egg you on. It's like everything that goes on from a certain view is like life just begging, come on, come on. And of course the kid was wondering, why is that? The insinuation that he knows that, something smells. I shouldn't be doing it, and it's not true, but when his life seems to just be begging for it. Of course, it's back to there being polarized forces running a three-dimensional world, that you got no choice. And Kyroots said there is an unmapped land, this is in quotation, this was a proper name, proper noun, land of havoc that is not that far away. It overlaps into the territories where you presently reside. Yet, it is not what ordinary men perceive as being always impending destruction and danger. Because if we just left it at saying there is a land of havoc that's not that far away, people could say, well, that's true. Now you're getting somewhere, because sure as hell, civilization is falling apart. I mean, the older I get and the wiser I get, it's just obvious. Kids are getting worse. Tastes are getting worse. Music, art, just everything. Just, by God, you hit it. And yet Kyroots kind of took away the fun. It overlaps into the territory, and yet it's not what ordinary men perceive as being the always impending danger. Addendum, it is, in fact, not all that unpleasant as you might first think from the name. Consider, at least the connotation, if you took from the view of antonyms, from havoc. Well, let's try it another way. The connotation synonymously with havoc, if you took it as being less than mechanical certainty, of being positive, that, well, their claims are unfounded. I don't believe that. That's a bunch of... What is the land of havoc? And Kyroots pointed out, according to him, it overlaps where you are now. It's not a matter of whether you're going to work and try to get there. And well, I'd like to see what this is, the land of havoc. He says it's already overlapped. And the insinuation also, if I may read into it, when he says it's not what ordinary men perceive as being the always impending danger and destruction, it's just over the horizon, that could be part of the basis of it, though, might it not? Whence do people make claims? Yes, I know God wants me to do what I'm doing. Are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. There's no doubt about it. Are you positive? Yeah. Well, let me just ask you this, okay? What if you're wrong? What if you've got a small tumor or something? What would that do? It certainly wouldn't help a man. If you're ordinary and thought that was an attack on the clergy, you could say, well, I'd teach him a lesson. No, he doesn't need a lesson. But what if you made people that said, I believe in the American Protestant middle-class values. I believe that the only life well spent is looking after your family, paying off your mortgage, and passing along something to your children. And maybe if you can derive a little pleasure for yourself, all right. Are you sure that that's the way you live? Yes, I'm sure. Are you positive? Well, yes, I'm 50 and that's the way I've lived. And you don't regret a second of it? No. You're positive. Do you follow? The land of havoc, I suggest, or Kyroots does, is already lapped into. It's already overlaid into the map of your own territory, but it's not seen as that. But it being there is one reason there has to be claims. So yes, I'm positive I'll live the way I should. And of course, with ordinary people, that's true, because if something happens that shakes that, that's not all that unusual. It happens in life. Those people normally end up under care of the state, and they raise our taxes to help take care of them, because people can't handle it. But along the way, they make claims to the constant contrary, that now life is good. As long as my house is still there, nobody's wrecked my car, stolen my car, my kids are not in jail, my wife hadn't left me, my business is not closing. If all of that's just right, if all my claims survive another 24 hours, yes, we're far from the land of havoc. Of course, if you can forget all of that, it's up here is where it matters. Because out there's always a land of havoc. It's known as death. All right. At least I got time to reread it. And Kyroots said, there was once a people who had a version of the Great Quest myth, wherein one of their past heroic figures undertook his own illustrious adventure, but instead of, as is normal, his miraculous travels from one land to another, his journey took him from the world of nouns into the realm of verbs, then ultimately into the kingdom of giants, wherein grand ideas can stand alone like beacons, with no need of verbal support from man. Even though I've just spent 25 minutes, in a sense, belying it, that is, no verbal support from man, that's still what I was talking about. I say it is, and I got the microphone, and you can't disprove it. You can ignore it, but you can't disprove it. Good night.